All right, so today we're going to be talking about couples matching. With us, we have two amazing resident doctors, MatchPal advisors. They're going to talk about, matching into the same program, same specialty, and why they chose their fields and what they learned now being on the other side of it all. So, without further ado, I want to thank you guys for joining us today and give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. Starting with Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's good to be here. Good to talk about a topic that I think it's not talked about as much. So excited to be here. So I'm Emily. I am obviously an IM resident. I really like the why of everything. And I think going through my rotations, playing that detective was really fun for me. And so coming into it was time for apply for the match and deciding what I really liked. I thought that would be the most interesting to me. I have some interest in some fellowships. I'm not quite sure at this point, but that's something I'm thinking about. I also really like academics and advising. So lots of fun things. And then we couples matched. And I'll let him introduce himself first, and then we'll talk about it.
Sweet. Glad to be here. I'm Josh. Emily and I have been together for a while. Couples matched just last year, both internal medicine. I really like internal medicine, like the detective work. I liken it a little bit to like directing an orchestra, right? So there's so many different like fields in the hospital that we bring together as internal medicine. I love doing that. I'm not sure about fellowship yet. I like the idea of hospital medicine, but we'll just kind of play it by ear, see how it goes. But yeah, excited to be here, answer some questions, and give you guys some fresh knowledge.
Love that. So, did you guys meet in medical school, or were you already together prior to medical school?
Yeah, actually, we met when we were like 16. We got married right after we graduated from undergrad. So we were married before we did medical school. And so it made it pretty obvious that we were definitely going to do couples match from the start since we were already married.
Some people meet in med school and they study together and they have a great time. We did not study together much, and so it was an interesting time here, but learned a lot and couldn't have done it with anyone else. So it was good.
Love that. Okay, so you guys knew you were going to a couples match from day one.
Yeah.
And that was probably, you went to the same medical school, I presume?
Yes.
Got it. And so you had that conversation. Let's say there's a medical student right now who is considering couples matching. What are the factors that they should be considering before taking that step into committing to doing the couples match?
I would say a few things to consider before you decide to couples match is one, like specialty of choice. What do you want to do? I think that there are a few fields out there that may be easier to couples match. We actually apply to the same fields. Sometimes that can be a little bit more difficult. But field is definitely something to consider. I think location is another thing to consider. How many cities are saturated with your residency of choice. If you're both doing neurosurgery, that might be harder to do. But if you find some primary care or you find something with a good balance, you might be able to do that. And then lastly, I would just remember you've worked so hard in your career leading up to this. Really take the long game approach and try to just find what's going to make you happy.
Absolutely. And were you guys like geographically limited in terms of the places you're willing to go, or were you willing to go realistically anywhere that you were able to train alongside one another?
I think that, I think that's a very individualized question. And so going into the match process, I think you have to think about your priorities. For us, I think we really wanted to stay more southeast because we have family and friends in that area. And so in some ways we were limited geographically because maybe certain cities didn't have as many programs. But when we were thinking about couples match, we tried to look for as many cities as we could that had programs within a reasonable distance. But I do think that it very much comes down to your priorities of like whether or not you're willing to go anywhere or whether or not you're not, and you want to stay closer to things that you like to do. But for us, we really thought about like the Southeast being primarily where we'd like to train.
Yeah, I think for the uninitiated, we're dealing with like a first, second, or even a third year med student who really hasn't thought much about the nuances or implications of a couples match. What are those? Like, how does that actually impact your potential match outcome, match quality?
A couple things. When you get interviews for this season, and I think ours is a little bit different because we matched into the same specialty, but oftentimes if program offers an interview, you would want that interview to be offered to your significant other, your whoever you're matching with, couples matching with. And so, I think an implication is like knowing that you may have to email that person or email that program or reach out and say, hey, listen, I'm applying as a couples match. This is who I'm applying with. Is there any way they can get an interview with this program or with another program that's in the area or something along those lines? And I think just knowing that you may have to communicate with program directors a little bit more is something to think about. I know, sometimes we had one program or two programs, I think, where we didn't get the same interview. And it wasn't necessarily because of anything bad. It was just an oversight. And then, when I said, or he said, hey, my significant other is applying, can they get an interview? We actually got interviews pretty quickly, like after that. but it is something to think about, having to be very communicative with program directors. And I think that's a very big implication that I didn't really consider. But I don't think it was necessarily a barrier, but just something to think about.
Part of it is a little bit more competitive, and part of it is an advantage, because at some point, being a resident with your significant other in the area, you're going to be more well-grounded. You're going to be able to do a better job, have your mind on the job and not on a city 2 hours away from you. So some people view it as an advantage. You just have to kind of narrate it that way and kind of spin it in a direction in a positive light. And that's kind of
Pretty much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think programs in general, they want residents that have ties that are going to be more likely to be happy and satisfied and less likely to need or want to leave. And I think that's a lot of the stuff that we talk about when we work with students who are not even couples matching, just generally like strategy for picking programs and communicating that connection or interest. So it definitely makes sense that for the couples match, it's even more prominent, and that it's also can be leveraged by the applicants, right? To get more interviews or to make a more compelling statement of why they'd be a good fit there, especially if it's a top choice program or city for both of them. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. What was match day like when you guys opened that envelope? How did that feel?
That's a good question.
Actually, we have a funny story about our match day. I was actually sick on match day, so it was kind of sad. But he was actually out of the country.
Yeah, I was traveling.
So ironically, we were not together at the same
On a
time.
match day trip, I was on an airplane and I opened up my email.
Wow.
Yeah.
I bought the airplane Wi-Fi the one time. I was texted. I was like, "Hey, we're
texting.
You got this? Did you get the save?" Well, obviously we did.
Yeah, we did it.
It was a good time.
It was great. It was fun. We celebrated like afterwards, like once he got back. I think that was the biggest thing, because I think going into match day, there's this suspense. There's like,
Oh yeah.
I just want to plan my life sort of thing, and we're like,
Of course.
it's March, and I'm like, wow, man, I start in like 3 months, and I don't know where I'm going, and then everyone gets that anxiety about it. But then you match, and you're like, okay, now I can look for where to live. Now I can think about, things that I want to do and establish my ways. And so I think that was a huge relief for us. And, we're matched where we wanted to match to, which was even better. So I think it was really fun. We had a great time afterwards.
It's funny how med school puts so much pressure on you in order to get things the way you want. And the truth is kind of roll with the punches and be happy where you are and find contentment. But it worked out for us super great. We're really happy where we're at. So
I love to hear that. I think, Josh, match day on an airplane, that's got to be a very limited number of people out there in the world that have ever done that. So good for you, man.
How do you forget about match day? But he kind of forgot about the date, and he was like, I'm going to be on an airplane that day.
yeah,
I was
Brian had invited me on a trip, and I had signed up, and here we are.
You can't say no to an end of MS sport trip. Like that's like you got to do it.
Yeah.
Highly recommend doing it after match day to those listening, but
Yeah.
on match day you could do it either way. All right, so match day happened. You guys are super happy, settled in. Now you're residents. You're in on the ground working with not only obviously your senior residents and attendings, but you're also working with medical students, both at your program that are rotating with you, and also as advisors and tutors through MatchPal. So now that you're kind of looking at this from the other side, is there anything that you would advise students to consider that maybe you weren't thinking about or weren't told about during your application process? And this could be related to couples match or related to maybe applying to residency in general.
I think the thing that comes to my mind the easiest is like asking for help and asking for people like a year or two above you. It's kind of the mantra we have here. But connection doesn't have to be, I am childhood friends with this person. It could be we went to the same med school, we both enjoyed a similar hobby. Like connection can start on something very small, and most people in medicine are willing to go out of their way as long as they have time, obviously. So I think asking for help would be my biggest thing, of asking people just a couple years ahead of you.
For me, honestly, I think I would just say like enjoy like the process. Like I think the process is very long, and I think that there's a lot of delayed gratification, but I think fourth year is a very fun time. And I think like just going into fourth year with the mindset of like, I'm going to learn as much as I can while I am as a fourth year, knowing that as soon as I get to residency, I'm working, I'm grinding. And so I think fourth year is a great time to like explore things maybe you wouldn't do before, or maybe you might not ever get to do again. And then like once you get to like residency, it's like, okay, I'm doing things that I wanted to do, but now I have all this random experience that I think has made me a better physician. And I think we both did that during fourth year a lot, which was really fun.
I agree.
And then the other thing too is I would just say like keep the connections you've made. Medical school is 4 years and you have lots of good friends that you make. And I think having those connections in the long term it's nice to be able to catch up and say, well, how's residency going for you or something like that, and making those connections even as you go further down the road, it's been fun.
Yeah, they're a lot more valuable than you think. It may not seem like it now. You've been with the same people for 4 years, but when everyone leaves to go across the country, it's going to be really nice if you know some people and you keep up those relationships.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And I think especially knowing people in different specialties or even in the same specialty, bouncing ideas, asking people one day, maybe not in residency, maybe later, you might need help building a service line, building a specific program, if you're doing procedures, these kinds of things like matter a lot, and having people in your corner, whether you make those friends in medical school or during residency, is super valuable for all of that. In addition to just like nostalgia. As difficult as it is, med school is a very unique and rewarding time. And I think people that went through that with you, like no one can relate to you the way like they can,
Totally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So now actually working one-on-one with students and providing that mentorship feedback, what would you say is the thing that actually makes students stand out?
For me, I think it's effort. I think even like reflecting on my own time, looking back like third year, my knowledge gap between now and then is significantly different, just because when you start residency, suddenly it is your job and like you need to find out what's going on and you need to do all that extra reading and learning. And I think at that point it becomes more intentional. But, I think going back even to third and fourth year, I really value people who put in a lot of effort. And that was something that I really did during the third and fourth year that I think made a lot of difference. I did a lot of hard rotations that I actually think have made me more comfortable where I am today and like give me a good background knowledge. So I think really the biggest difference that I've noticed in students is when they put a lot of effort in. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, I would say like a good hack for medical students trying to be a good teammate is to recognize that everyone has value on the team. So like just because you're a medical student doesn't mean you can't help out. You can go see patients in the morning. You can make follow-up clinic visits. Shout out to my medical students. They're amazing for doing that, updating families. Even sometimes we have clinical questions of like, we need to go and do some research because, they have maybe 2-3 patients. They have that time to really go in and find the crux of what we're trying to figure out. And so whatever you can do to be a team player, like do it. And that really makes the residents' lives a lot easier.
I think we have a unique lens on it afterwards that you can't really have during, because it's very different when you're being evaluated versus actually evaluating people, whether it's formally or informally. I think the 3 A's always resonated with me. I'm in interventional radiology, a little bit more surgical. Those things really stand out to me. Students that are available, meaning like they're not lazy, they're present, they're like there to work and learn, right? Students that are able, right? So they're competent, they have baseline knowledge that's to their level or more, and affable, right? People who are personable, have good communication skills, easy to get along with, demonstrate professionalism. I think the students that demonstrate those 3 just to become rock star candidates for the residency selection process. People want to work with them, people want them in their program, and they end up doing really well, even if they have some deficiencies on their application. So I think those things just become a magnet. Positivity, like people just want you around, right?
I think that's one of the hacks of the AIs too, is if you can get an audition rotation there, you show good, like you said, the A's, you show good effort and good positivity, it's really hard to think of you any different way than just being positives.
And a lot of times it's just, going like the extra mile, like not being afraid to like take on extra challenges, not being afraid to stay late. I think everyone knows that this is a very taxing field to be in, but I think you can look at it 2 ways. You can either be bitter or you can be better. And so I think like at the end of the day, like when you're there for a long time, make you better, Don't be upset that you're there for a long time. Admittedly, we all have our days where like, I wish I could have gone home a little earlier today. But at the same time, you're getting to take care of people, and that's a privilege. So like learning how that can make you a better physician is really important. And I think, attitude is everything, I think that's a huge, huge part of it.
Absolutely. It's March right now. A lot of students are getting ready to take the boards. And Emily, you've done quite a bit of tutoring. And, Josh, obviously you took these exams too. So I'd love to hear from your take if there's any specific tips or any specific areas that students typically underprepare or don't emphasize enough in their prep that leads them astray in terms of getting the optimal score on, step 1, step 2.
One, I think, going in with the mindset of this is a very temporary time in your life. And I think that's a huge, huge part of it, because a lot of people let themselves get really, really overwhelmed, and they're like, this is the worst time of my life having to do all this. And really you're talking about like 3 to 6 months, give or take. And so I think having the mindset made up that this is temporary, but I'm going to give it my all in this time is really, really important. And I think that's not talked about enough, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of people get bogged down. But in terms of like the actual education, I prepared to take the exam is essentially not just learning the information, but learning how to take the exam. And so a lot of times the exam it's like a mental marathon. And so if you're only doing a few questions here and there, I think that's tough to be able to have that mental fortitude to be able to take an 8-hour exam essentially. So I think it's really important to practice what you're going to be taking and really just making sure that you're reviewing your incorrect topics as much as possible, because a lot of times you may know the easy stuff, but the problem is so does everyone. And so if there's things that you're missing that are more difficult, those are the things that you have to hit harder and harder. But really, I think mindset's the most important thing. Like, you're here to learn, you're here to be the best that you can be. And like, don't let yourself essentially say, oh, I don't need to learn that, or like, that's not important. Because even though you may go into your field of choice, like for us, internal medicine, like having a good understanding of OB is important for my field. I see obstetric patients. And I don't see a lot of pediatric patients, but sometimes there's pediatric conditions that carry on into childhood. And so having a good understanding of what those are is important. And so I think just having that mindset that what you're doing is important, doing it intentionally, and let that carry you forward.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I say mental games is all it is. I mean, the highest level of sports, it's the same thing. It's all mental, right? Like everyone has the skills, everyone can learn the same knowledge, but can you be the one to outwork everyone? And I think self-belief starts on, day one. If you're dedicated, no one's going to outwork me. I'm going to put in the dedication. I'm going to score well. And just repeat that to yourself and celebrate the small wins. If you get overwhelmed, reach out early. Don't reach out, 2 weeks before the exam and with a mini freak out.
There is a playbook to getting, at the very least, an average to slightly above average score. And I think depending on what your goal is, if you're going for the 260, you have to understand that that's going to require you to outwork 90% of an already extremely talented and disciplined group of people, right? So you got to be ready for it, and you got to make a plan. And if you need support for that, that's fine too. Whether it's formal tutoring or informal mentorship from an upperclassman who did really well, but you need to have that established understanding that this is going to be really hard, right? You're trying to get something really difficult to attain, so you got to work extremely hard for it, and you are compared against your peers with all these exams. So it's not like a abstract performance, it's a relative performance. And that's what students, I think, it's like, how many questions correct did everyone else get? And that's what you're being compared against. So there's one last piece of advice that you wish you could tell yourself when you were starting this whole process of, third year steps, you're asked lingering personal statements lingering in the back of the head, what would it be?
Again, I think I would just go back to the same concept of just enjoy it. Because I really do, I love what I do now, like being in residency. It is fun. I love my co-residents. I love the program I'm at. But I also really liked being a medical student. It was fun. Not quite as much pressure, but also you realize how far you come along when you're learning these topics. And you're like, oh yeah, I do remember this. And I do understand this now. And I think that it was really fun to be able to delve into multiple different fields and just see how that life looks like. Enjoy it. Enjoy the process.
That's awesome. Yeah, I guess I lend myself a little bit to something to do when people are running, right? So if you're running 5-6 miles, maybe a half marathon, whatever, and let's say halfway through, mile 3 is really tough, really difficult, you start to cramp. Mile 4, same thing. That doesn't mean you're going to be cramping a mile 8. Things get better, easier, the more you work at it. And so in third year, you're getting exposed to all these different rotations. Every time you figure out what's going on, you go to a different rotation the next week. But things get easier and you find out what you like, and things become more natural the more times you learn. And so don't be afraid to put in the work, and things are going to get better. And just because you're cramping on mile 7 doesn't mean mile 11 is not going to be better, right? So just put in the work and keep going.
We'll put a pin in it there. Thank you guys so much for sharing the wisdom, the insights. I think this is a lot of stuff here that not too much resources or information about out there. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us, Dan. This was fun. And hopefully this helps out anyone who's playing couples match or just the regular match. Hopefully it helps you guys.
Yeah, good luck.
This video is presented to you by MatchPal, a resident-run advising and mentorship platform. If you're interested in working one-on-one with a resident mentor in your future specialty on ERAS, interview prep, personal statement editing, single token strategy, or US Simile and complex tutoring, visit us at matchpalmedical.com.